that there's
You're almost
that you're
pulling it.
you so when so and I
understand-
want to share my
No, I
reaction
understand that, and
to
Hollie's watched the movie, and I've seen little segments of it, but the point is, I know he was clear to me he was cutting it that way. He came in, he wasn't a normal documentary person that comes in with just a kind of an idea, just let, some good documentary makers come to to try and let everybody express their real views.
right.
It was completely clear that that wasn't that gentleman's interest. He had a preconceived view, and he
Right.
deliberately, and you can do it to anybody. I could take the stuff you said if I was a skilled editor, and I
Yeah.
can make you say anything under the sun by just putting little clips in. And so to me, why am I gonna bother watching it? I really enjoy talking with you people because you're really people sitting here.
Yeah.
But this thing just makes me frustrated.
So can I
I
ask you
was
for
in
my
a
next
watch it.
for my
I'm
next
in a lot of
because I want to be prepared when I see you the next time. Like I'd like to support you in what you're looking for, and what I did here was that, you know, if I found an engineering, you said an engineering document.
Yeah.
So if you could be more specific, and you don't have to say it right now, even an email of what you mean by like a research document, that would help me, one. And two, when we come back to the table and talk about
Yeah.
chemtrails,
Yeah.
when you were speaking about, because you were at the American Association of Advanced Science Conference in San Diego.
AAA.
So were you speaking of a project called aerosol spraying with chemicals? What do I call it that you were speaking
Okay.
of?
So what I was speaking of was this thing that we call geoengineering,
So
which
you-
we
okay,
publish
so-
lots about.
Okay.
And so I was talking about a particular set of ideas about how we might put sulfur or perhaps alumina into the stratosphere, might do it, and what we know about the potential risks and benefits of doing it.
Okay.
And the reason we do that is to, not I say we do it. I wouldn't do it. I'm a scientist. The reason that we might recommend, and at this point nobody's even doing that.
And this is
Yeah.
spraying, can I say it's the spraying of sulfur and
Sure.
potentially alumina?
I mean, you
Is
can
that-
say it, obviously, in
I
the
think
context
I
of this
wanna learn that.
conversation.
And most importantly,
Yeah.
the conversation
Yeah.
that David about geoengineering is having
Yeah.
is not where commercial
Right, they
airliners
can't
fly.
get it.
It must be much higher
Yeah.
in what's called the stratosphere.
And they
And
don't
so,
make chemical
so
contracts.
it's a little, so it's different, right? So when an airplane flies that high in the sky, it doesn't change the moisture in the sky into what produces a contrail. It flies without producing anything because it's much colder.
Yeah, I mean, you may ask why sometimes contrails look narrow and sometimes spread out. That's to do with the relative humidity in
Right.
the air, and there's
Yes.
this circulation in the air that's not, we understand, I mean, it's been
Yeah.
well understood since the 50s, because as soon as you had jet
Right.
aircraft, people saw this.
Yes.
And as soon as you had jet aircraft, you could see that sometimes were narrow, and even on one track, you can see it be narrow, wide, narrow, wide. So people said, why is that? And there's been a bunch of research to understand it. And
Right.
it's well understood, has to do with the way ice crystals form in the upper atmosphere. But the point is, in the stratosphere is very different
Yeah.
in lots
So
of ways, yeah.
do we have access to that research then?
Of course.
Oh, okay,
There's-
that would be
there's-
very
And
good
I-
for
and I
us to
think
have
this
as
is
well.
important.
Centuries, there's 50
But-
years of public research.
Okay.
And I
It's
just
all-
want to touch on that. I think it's
Yeah.
important to know that people who are communicating about chemtrails use the internet, and as scientists or as researchers, we communicate through a slightly different medium. And there-
Slightly, that's very diplomatic.
we communicate in a very different way, and we can debate. Oftentimes, it is not as great, but there is no hiding what David or I talk about. We publish in areas, and those things have to get read by people and in their
Peer-reviewed.
conception of science. So peer-reviewed journals.
There's a lot
And
of
we have
that on the
access to them
internet, for
David's-
sure.
On
Yep.
David's website, everything he publishes, we publish together, he publishes with other students.
It's all open.
Is there, and it's
Yeah.
open.
Mhm.
And
Wonderful.
if there are questions about it, again, send us an email
Let's be
about
clear.
what you
We're
explained.
publicly funded, and we have to be open by law.
Right.
So in principle, you guys can file Freedom of Information Act requests, and we'll give you
Yeah.
it's actually, we'll just give it to you if you ask. Because I mean,
Yeah.
that's how you get, that's why we're here. But we're close to the end of the time, but let me answer, people say, like, what would I want to see to believe it more, for what it's worth?
Yeah.
Yes.
So let me just come back a little bit to the fact, because I've had a bunch, as well as this dialogue, I've had a bunch of email dialogues. I had one last night, actually, getting ready for this with some person in Vancouver. the sheer business of seeing contrails that are sometimes wide and sometimes narrow, to me proves, let me just be absolutely clear about this, it doesn't prove there aren't chemtrails, right? But it proves, it doesn't just have anything to say about it, because it's a normal natural phenomena that's well understood and been understood for 50 years. Or I just keep saying 50, it's probably more like 40. And in fact, there's a sort of chemtrails discussion site, which I think is run by somebody who seems to be less believing, who's actually scanned some old textbooks that show you those pictures that are old. So from my point of view, that it doesn't prove they're not there, but it doesn't say anything at all. So one of the main things the chemtrails people say is they say contrails didn't used to do that. And I say, huh? It's like basic science, they always did that.
Yeah.
So the sort of things that would make me take this thing seriously, I mean, you know, I'm a scientist, I work in probability, so I gradually take things more and more seriously depending on the evidence. But if there was really a really large-scale program, again, there'd have to be, the way people work, this huge set of procurement and engineering documents about moving and stuff. Even if the people doing it didn't know why, the documents still have to be there. You just, in the modern world, can't put large quantities of stuff on commercial aircraft without a lot of paperwork.
What about privately?
Yeah.
Privately what?
They just exist.
Private research, private
They
documents.
can be private or public documents?
But if, so I guess we gotta figure out what the theory is. If the theory is that it's on commercial aircraft, because that's what people show me the pictures of,
Right.
then commercial aircraft operating out of commercial airfields, since that's where they operate out of, you'd have to have this huge supply chain to do it. If you're going to introduce enough materials to sea, you've got to be introducing tons, and it's got to move in big trucks.
But David's
And somebody-
question, I
yeah.
think, is, it doesn't, and correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong, he's not suggesting that it's all government of Canada documents. If you had
No.
big engineering
No,
firms or
yeah, it's not
whatever,
necessarily government
so
documents.
in terms of private
Or small engineering.
public, it doesn't matter,
Yeah,
it's just,
basically,
it exists.
Joe's Aviation Services. The point is, if you want to put a widget on an aircraft and spray something, let's say you want to, you've got a contract with somebody to build it, unless you go out yourself.
Patents.
And that could be, well, patents are sort of irrelevant for
How
things like
about,
this.
Really? They're not- they're irrelevant?
How about
Why?
Boeing or Airbus?
Pardon?
How about Boeing or Airbus? Say you have
Good-
another CEO
Great example.
of them and you got them to say, hey, put this new device, it will improve your fuel efficiency.
Understood, but there has to be, for Boeing or Airbus to do it, there has to be a giant paper trail, because there's all these engineers who know, for safety reasons, that they can't put anything on a civilian aircraft without losing their job, unless there's this big paper trail.
Well, what about weather
So- so it might be
modification?
more Let me just say it.
Might be more difficult on civilian aircraft. if-
Extraordinary.
If they were going to do it on civilian aircraft.
Extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah.
On military aircraft, yeah, of course, it's much easier.
And actually, a lot of the chemtrails that are seen are doing this crisscross type of grid thing, which seems unlikely for commercial aircraft to be doing.
Okay, so again, I don't know what the theory is, but most people who told me have said that they think it's on commercial, they show me pictures of it,
Yeah.
you know, obvious, like, you know, 747, 767, et cetera. So, just saying, if that was true, then there's huge stacks of engineering documents somewhere, whether it's at Joe's Aviation Supply House or Boeing or whatever, and one person has to just, you know, download the PDF and we're done. You know, that's incredibly strong proof.
Okay, I'm
Just
just
a
trying to
second.
understand, because
Yeah.
Weather Modification Inc. exists, like they're the ones who do the
Sure, but we
cloud
know,
seeding.
right, but we know what, but you can go visit, you know what they spray. You
Yeah,
can go
right.
look at it.
So
we
I
know
mean, I
that's not the
could
problem.
give you all their information, but I
Sure.
just don't understand
But-
how that's going to suddenly change your point of view.
Well, because
That's not
it's not chemtrails, you can go visit them and you know what you're putting in.
I see.
So
Like, I
whether,
mean-
so David and I don't sit here, and I don't think the Texas government, I mean, the
Yeah.
Texas governor basically sent out a prayer recently to say, we
Yeah,
need
that's
to do
Yeah.
tech seeding. So
Yeah.
there's no one in this.
Cloud seeding is a
room.
normal commercial enterprise. I don't
Yeah.
think it actually works very well.
Yeah.
But the point is, these guys aren't secret. You can just go visit them and go look at what they're spraying. You
I
take a
agree.
sample, they wouldn't
Well,
know
and,
that.
and here's
And the
another
point is,
thing,
we all know that.
like
So
the
that's not-
weathermen,
Just to be
like-
clear, so
Yeah.
clearly, if chemtrails is a thing, it isn't that thing,
right.
right? Because that thing is, so if chemtrails
Okay.
is some secret